Ready or not to host the World Cup? About 2 weeks from now, there are some security concerns being raised. Illinois about to ban student cell phones from first bell to last bell of the day, and America's talking. Welcome to the Center Square Daily. I'm Carlene Johnson, pinch hitting for Greg Bishop on this June 1st, 2026. Time to turn the calendar and probably time to make the mortgage payment as well. Now, Seattle is going to be hosting 6 matches for FIFA World Cup. Just a couple of weeks from now, matches to be played at Lumen Field in Seattle from June the 11th through July the 19th. The stadium is going to host several marquee matchups. You can see the matches to be held here. Most notably, the United States is going to be playing Australia on June the 19th. And you can still get tickets for that matchup. I just checked the ticket website today and found out that tickets are going anywhere from about $1,100 for the cheap seats up to about $6,000 per ticket for better seats for that June 19th matchup with the USA versus Australia, if you can afford that. Meantime, tourism officials, not just here in Seattle, but across the country, have been scaling back expectations for what a windfall the World Cup in the USA is going to be. And American Hotel and Lodging Association recently came out to say that nearly 80% of surveyed hoteliers, easy for me to say, in the region, say their bookings are lagging far behind what they expected those to be. They reported in April that despite more than 5 million tickets sold, the demand had not yet translated into strong hotel bookings. And that may well be because a lot of the tickets are being purchased by domestic travelers. You might have somebody, driving across the country to a Seattle match or driving to New York for a match, but not necessarily, flying in and booking a hotel to stay. So international traveler bookings for World Cup across the country are far down what they expected that to be. It might be geopolitical concerns significantly suppressing some of that demand. Apparently there are some delays and barriers with getting international visas for travel as well that could be playing into that. Now, despite the lowered projections, you've got host cities and business interests in those host cities super excited and optimistic about what's to come. Certainly it's likely to be a boon for cities like Seattle, but how big of a boon remains to be seen. And last Friday, I had a conversation with Seattle Downtown Association President and CEO John Scholes, who told me, I want to get an idea. What are your members saying? Is everyone excited about the World Cup? Freaked out about the World Cup coming? What is everyone saying? And one of the interesting parts of the conversation I found was where he said that he has been pushing back on Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson to turn those cameras on. They've got the cameras. Turn them on in the stadium district where the games are going to be held, where people are going to be traveling from the downtown core south to the stadium district for those matches. He says, we've got the cameras and they should be turned on.
Cameras are clearly helping us solve crimes that otherwise wouldn't be solved and helping us apprehend suspects who have, committed serious crimes that potentially wouldn't have been apprehended otherwise. I've never heard a juror, a victim of crime, or a prosecutor say, hey, we wish we had less evidence. And these cameras provide clear evidence, and they're helping our officers. And as we rebuild the police force and hire more officers, and we've been down, several hundred over these last couple of years from where we were in 2019, having this tool and technology is helpful. So I say more cameras. I'm glad the mayor has evolved her position and I think recognized the value of this system and has been listening and talking to a lot of people and kept the ones we do have in place, which was, I think, somewhat potentially contrary to the position and some of what she said on the trail. So I commend her for, listening, evolving her position, taking on new information. I do think the ones by the stadium that have been installed, we should turn them on. There's, I think, very little risk that the federal government takes over this pretty limited camera system, and the benefits far outweigh that limited risk. And we should remind ourselves we have lots of cameras that if the federal government really wanted to take them over, whether it's our traffic cameras or Port of Seattle or the Pike Place Market, or we've got cameras at City Hall. There's plenty of camera systems. The federal government wants to take them over.
Yeah, so basically, he mentioned the federal government because that has been the pushback from Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson. She doesn't want the feds to access any of the surveillance cameras around the city, worried that that could be used as a tool for going after illegal immigrants that have committed crimes and finding out where those folks are. There's no evidence that the feds at this point have taken over control of those cameras. He's not the only one, though, speaking out about concerns with the cameras. We had Seattle City Council member Rob Saka just last week. He's been leading the charge, citing his personal experience because he was at the Boston bombing in 2013. And of course, those cameras were used to end up ultimately tracking down the two individuals responsible for that horrible terrorist attack. So this is what Councilmember Saka said at last week's City Council meeting.
I don't think that our city is as ready as it could be to host the world for such a global event of this scale. The good news is that the solution is simple, and there's a quick fix available. This council has previously authorized and funded the expansion of critical security cameras in key areas throughout the city, including in my own council district, the Stadium District, SoDo, where the actual matches for FIFA World Cup will be played. We know there's a distributed model and fans are going to gather throughout the city and throughout the region. The actual games themselves, the largest congregation of people, are going to take place right in the Stadium District. So this council has previously authorized that and funded that. And I'm proud that we also baked in the best in the nation guardrails and robust privacy controls to prevent misuse and prevent data from falling into the hands of the federal government for immigration purposes. So today, I'm calling on Mayor Wilson to turn on the SoDo cameras ahead of World Cup.
Now, we have reached out to the office of Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson for comment on this. Was told last week that she is unavailable, but will try to find, I'm told, 10 to 15 minutes to sit down with us to talk about the cameras and other issues of the city. One of the other things, though, that John Scholes with the Downtown Seattle Association brought up with me is he said, I wish the city had done more to address the homeless and drug addiction crisis, which is evident everywhere you go in the city of Seattle. And the graffiti, it's a blight pretty much everywhere you go, and he's not at all happy about that.
The graffiti drives me nuts, particularly on our, major pieces of public infrastructure, whether it's light rail facilities or the freeway or the new connection to 520. We've taken care of a lot of it within the downtown with our own ambassador team, so we haven't seen a lot of progress on some of the major state and regional infrastructure. And I don't think it's all that complicated. You do have to paint over it as quickly as possible to help deter it and, hold people accountable where you can for, damaging public property. The county prosecutor has done that in certain cases, has filed 17 felony charges. I joined her for an announcement around that. I think it was about a year ago. So I think there's some action being taken, but clearly not enough maintenance, not enough paint overs on some of that state property. And I'd love to see WashDOT out there, particularly as we are going to welcome the world here to clean it all up and then to keep it clean.
Important to note, as we are a taxpayer-focused organization at the Center Square, that state taxpayers here did spend $47 million allocated by lawmakers for some modifications to the stadium and some transportation improvements. Light rail also, is ready across Lake Washington if folks want to go back and forth to the east side. But $47 million in taxpayer funds so that we could be a host city for the World Cup. All right, now to Illinois and legislation that has been passed as of Sunday, as this marathon session of the legislature wrapped up, to ban student cell phones. I've still got a high schooler at home. She would not like this, but they're not going to have their phones from first bell to last bell. And so joining me now is reporter Sean Reed, who's been covering this. So, Sean, Illinois joins a number of other states across the nation that have done this, basically to say students should pay attention to their teacher and the instruction instead of looking at their phone and finding out how many likes their last social media post received.
Yeah, that is correct. And fortunately for your high schooler, if she was going to school here in Illinois, there would be a good chance that her school district would exempt her from such a ban, at least in the hallways, when going to the bathroom, during lunch period, and other instances. Obviously, cell phones will be allowed to be carried onto a school's campus. You'll be able to have it as you are at after school activities, before school, and in between class periods for those high school students. As for the rest of Illinois students in public schools, the like K through 12, basically minus high school, you're going to see an entire ban for it. Now, a lot of other states have also implemented some state taxpayer funds allocated to school districts for the implementation of a cell phone ban in schools. A lot of districts have purchased cell phone lock bags, usually used with a little magnetic locking and unlocking device that they are able to kind of get students to put it in the lock bag at the beginning of the day and then unlock it, drop the bag back off, keep it all in the school, and not have to worry about collecting all of the students' phones and getting them put back into their pockets at the end of the day. So it'll be interesting because Illinois has not included that funding for school districts, and we've obviously seen a lot of taxpayer funding going toward a lot of school districts reaching some revenue that they need out of local taxpayer pockets through property taxes and so on.
So, but wait, Sean, they're going to do the carve out though, sounds like for the high school kids to when they are, passing periods, lunchtime, going to the bathroom. Okay, that one is the red flag for me because then everybody's just going to go to the bathroom for like 15 minutes and use their phone. There's going to have to be some parameters on that, right? I can just only imagine everybody's going to have to use the bathroom at least once for every class so they can grab their phone. These kids are addicted. It's the high schoolers who have the worst problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the legislation that was passed by the General Assembly yesterday is that a school district must implement the actual policy within the student handbook. If there is one that's printed, they must adjust it and print that in the student handbook. This takes place for the 2027-28 school year. So a school district to school board would have to adopt that policy by then. So between now and then, they've got some time to figure out kind of what the rules are. They can try a test run in some of the schools across the state, kind of get findings, share with regional superintendents, and make the policies at the school board level. And high schoolers can be exempted. So there's a chance that some school districts will do a complete ban for high school students and putting them in those lock boxes with the magnet bags. It's really ultimately local control, which is something that we've seen being cut back on in some other instances of legislation down here this week.
Now, your session in Illinois went extra long, like a month longer than it was supposed to go. And it sounded like there was a lot of discussion about cuts, the federal cuts, and HR 1, blaming Trump for some of the cuts. Is that the main reason why the session ended up going as late as it did this year?
So I will note, we didn't go a full month longer. We went into the following month. So the last scheduled day for the General Assembly was May 31st. After midnight on May 31st, you have to get a supermajority, three-quarters of votes to pass a state budget. Anything with an implementation date that is immediate or without an implementation date. So we had a lot of discussions behind closed doors pertaining to the federal cuts through HR 1. A lot of it had to do with cuts to SNAP funding, which the state has ultimately resolved for the short term. There is a supplemental 2-month coverage from the state funds that'll go directly to a consumer's link card if they have SNAP benefits and are looking to get in line with the new federal regulations. So if they are previously exempt from work requirements and now they are required to get those work requirements corrected, they're eligible for a certain payment for just coverage for 2 months while they figure out how the system works and get onto it and in all of the proper documentation in place. And the state will only be paying for those 2 months.
And Sean, I'm wondering if minority Republicans in Illinois kind of have the same takeaway from legislative session that minority lawmakers, Republicans in Washington do, similar legislative makeups, I know, between the two states. So in Washington, Republicans basically said, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. We've got plenty of money pouring into state coffers. We don't need more taxes. We just have to stop spending at these crazy levels. Do minority Republicans in Illinois kind of share that sentiment as well?
Definitely. That is actually word for word a quote that I've heard in committee hearings on the House and Senate floors, all throughout the session, really, since January, February, when they've kind of came to order and started introducing new legislation for the year. It's been definitely interesting to kind of see those criticisms develop as time has moved. A lot of their criticisms have moved from the state's got a general problem with spending on state services toward the state is able to cut back on spending on some state services in order to shift that money over to cover the gaps from federal cuts. So the criticism itself has changed, but that base of it is not a funding problem, it's a spending problem is definitely the same situation here in Illinois.
Yeah, sounds exactly like what we've got here in Washington. Sean, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Check out the story at the Center Square Illinois page. Again, thanks for your time, Sean. And now, America's Talking, where we check out the Center Square's coverage around the nation. There was a horrible crash in Virginia last Friday, blamed on a non-English speaking man who emigrated from China. 5 people were killed in that crash and dozens of others injured. The man blamed for the crash is 48-year-old Jing Dong, a U.S. citizen who will be charged with involuntary manslaughter in that crash. He was driving a big motor coach for E&P Travel, headquartered in North Carolina, driving from New York to North Carolina. A family of 4, an entire family, including children, traveling from Massachusetts to South Carolina for a wedding on Sunday. They were killed in that Friday crash, as was a young woman from Massachusetts. This crash occurred on I-95 in Stafford County. As I mentioned, dozens of others injured, 44 others taken to area hospitals, and 3 remain in critical condition as of today. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy addressed the horrible crash, saying that Dong could not speak English, but was still allowed to obtain a commercial driver's license from New York in 2024. Duffy called that unacceptable. This is just the latest of many of these awful stories that we have covered in recent weeks and months, caused by drivers who obtained CDLs. In some cases, they're illegal immigrants. In this case, the man was a U.S. citizen, but did not apparently speak English. Now to New Jersey, where violent clashes continue between ICE officers and anti-ICE agitators. A nighttime curfew remains in effect outside of that New Jersey ICE detention facility today after days of these violent confrontations and demonstrators that prompted Governor Sherrill to deploy state police to restore order. That curfew is in place from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., and there were groups of people that were arrested over the weekend violating that order, that curfew order, but also bringing with them all kinds of objects. They were armed with helmets, shields, gas masks, and ignored that state police order to disperse. Again, dozens of arrests were made. That ICE facility there in New Jersey has become the latest flashpoint in opposition to President Trump's crackdown on immigration since a group of detainees allegedly went on a hunger strike there to protest conditions, they say, inside that facility. And finally, in Ohio, a random sampling of child care centers receiving taxpayer subsidies turns up $1 million in overpayments. Sounds very familiar to people in Washington state, no doubt. They said it was a random sample review of taxpayer-funded licensed child care centers where they found this $1 million in overpayments. And they actually terminated agreements with 10 of those daycare centers. 400 providers representing, they say, a statistically valid sampling of the total number of providers with agreements to provide publicly funded childcare in Ohio. They say the reviews included an in-depth analysis of attendance records and practice. And again, some of these centers no longer receiving state funding. Now, based on the sampling they took and the number of providers in Ohio receiving taxpayer subsidies, they say this really is just representative of only 1.6% of all of their spending annually on daycare subsidies, which amounts to nearly $1 billion, $969 million in Ohio. So that is a wrap on this Monday's June 1st episode of the Center Square Daily. As always, we thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to us on social media and join us tomorrow for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer.